So the next slides I'm going to show are getting right into the case studies. Track number 1, completion effectiveness, looking at things like conductivity and effective frac area. This is, again, this is something Dave presented. It's a paper that he wrote, a 3-well pad for an operating company in the Eagle Ford. And RTA in this particular paper last year was used to understand well performance drivers and completion effectiveness. The study shows an infill well, which is the middle well that sits between a couple plug and perf wells, and we'll get into the characteristics of the completion in the next slide. And it comes on with really, really bad flush production. I mean, low rate, low flowing pressure. It did not look like a strong well candidate just by looking at those basic performance metrics. However, the study will show that with very limited production data, rate transient analysis revealed that that infill well suffered from a very significant apparent skin damage or low apparent fracture conductivity term, and it ends up that it's a much bigger SRV and therefore has a much bigger EUR to go with it. So I'm throwing out a lot here. I want to make sure I'm clear about defining completion types, just for the people in the audience that may not be familiar, particularly with a new term that's been in the industry for the last few years, which is the pinpoint completion. So when we compare completion technology, especially for those of us that have got a lot of experiences in the lower 48, because we see a lot of completion types up here in Canada, is that it's ubiquitous that the incumbent completion type is the plug and perf style completion for most basins, most ultra-tight plays. The plug and perf is a limited entry system as depicted in the bottom left-hand cartoon here, and it has advantages and disadvantages. One of its disadvantages is that it's a limited entry system that has several perforation clusters within an individual stage typically. Usually the perforation cluster count is anywhere between 3 and 6 clusters. And by having multiple entry points in the system as we pump our stage is that the sand and the frac fluid can take whatever path it so chooses. And oftentimes as a result of this completion configuration, it can pinch out certain clusters and it can take other clusters with all the sand and water. So it creates a very non-uniform reservoir description. It lacks control. The pinpoint completion, on the other hand, is a single point entry system which can be achieved either through cuts or sleeves. And in these generally, when we say pinpoint, mean a cemented liner system. And cemented liners really so that we have better control over fracture placement initiation. It's not a perfect system, but it's, in terms of best in class for fracture placement, it would be considered that. The study area is here. We have 3 wells that are spaced at 700 feet apart, so that you can see where the infill well is in green, landed in between the 2 blue circles. This is a gas condensate, a rich gas condensate part of the Eagle Ford. The production of the pad is illustrated here. Here we can see the performance of all 3 wells, the original parent plug and perf wells, which offset that infill, and you can see their production rate histories in red and their flowing pressures in black, and their condensate yield into the green presented in the middle. After about a year of production, you can see that infill come in, and you can see as it comes in, it disturbs the performance, the gas rate history in particular of those 2 plug and perf wells. When we normalize production, so we start looking at all these wells at time 0 so that we can compare them, we can see what I was saying at the beginning of the case study, that the well did not IP as well as the plug and perfs, that the flowing pressure also was low. It certainly didn't look very promising to begin with. But given a very limited amount of data on that infill well, which is the pinpoint, we can see that the reason why it suffers out of the gate is a very large y-intercept here on this linear flow specialized plot, which is indicative of an apparent skin term. And a skin term is like a downhole choke. It really restricts flow and as a result causes poor out of the gate performance. But the slope of the line is the most revealing, and the slope of the line, which is trying to characterize the linear flow segment of performance, the more shallow the better. The more shallow that line is, the more effective frac area we're creating, assuming that permeability for this section or this pad is a constant. So in that sense, it has more effective frac area. Also, in terms of the stimulated reservoir volume or contacted oil in place, or gas in place, I should say, for a gas well, we're seeing that those plug and perf wells are projecting to a volume that's roughly 50% of what that infill pinpoint well has contacted. And that infill well, of course, has half the production history of the other wells. So it's truly a strong performer, and therefore explains why its decline characteristics aren't as sharp. It's not declining as steeply. So that gives you a good sense of how we use RTA to understand completion effectiveness, where we're just looking at some basic analysis.